we get started, I want to make sure everyone understands that this presentation is designed to educate and inform you of this very complex issue, but understand that no one up here is giving you legal advice or transactional advice. You need to check with your broker, okay? All right, so let's get started. Our first presentation is by Alex Elward. He's the CAL FIRE San Diego Unit Battalion Chief, and he is going to educate you. This is, again, it's a very complex topic. Things are changing all the time, and I think that today you'll get the most up-to-date information that you've had so far. Alex?
Let's give this a try. All right, outstanding. So thank you very much for the introduction. I just want to say that we really appreciate this opportunity so that we can educate you. I know that we hear from a lot of real estate agents and a lot of homeowners based on some of the changes related to defensible space and AB 38, and I've put together a presentation to make it a lot more simpler, and then also refer you to a single source website that has all the information that we're going to cover today. So if you forget something or you need to reference something, in my presentation, I will show you exactly where to go. All right, so with that, we have an introduction video here. All right, so as you can see, I work for CAL FIRE. CAL FIRE is California's fire department. We're an all-risk agency. We are kind of known for our wildland fire capabilities and what we bring to the table with that, along with our partners. However, that is 8,000 calls of the 535,000 calls that we respond to across from California are wildland fires. So it's something that we pride ourselves as being experts in. But as you kind of saw from the video, we respond to flooding, structure fires, medical emergencies. We do reforestation efforts. We do law enforcement. We do a very large amount of work across the state of California, including defensible space, what we're going to talk about now. We didn't make the cut on the video, but it's also very important. So myself, I've been with CAL FIRE for 17 years. I'm currently assigned to San Diego County Community Risk Reduction. I oversee our AB 38 inspections for the county, and I also have an associate's, a bachelor's, and a master's degree kind of in the same related field. This is another example of our all-risk agency. This is a third alarm structure fire. This is a small abandoned residential fire, and that's me as a young man 17 years ago. All right, so we're going to dig right into it. We're first going to talk about defensible space and the law. Then we're going to go into Assembly Bill 38 and how that affects real estate agents and home buying. And then we're going to quickly touch on home hardening. Home hardening is kind of a subject in itself. So I'm going to play a quick 30-second video that kind of goes over it and then refer to a website where you can find more information. Most of it's going to be on AB 38. So let's talk about defensible space and the law. Why defensible space? Well, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So the fact of the matter is that there is a very high fire danger in California, some of the highest in the world, and we're constantly seeing fires come up to residential and communities, very similar to these photos here. So that's the Cedar Fire from 2003. And we can see that the only way that we can protect these structures is to have defensible space. And the motto that we say is homeowners provide the defense, the fire department provides that offense. So let's look at our 20 largest fires in California's history. This goes all the way back from 1932. And you'll see in the different colors signify years, okay? So the largest fire that California has ever experienced was the August Complex Fire, this one at the bottom. That was over 1 million acres, okay? We have an upward trend. So for the past 22 years, over 3/4 of the acres burned has happened in the last 12 years. So there's a significant uptick in how more frequent fires are happening and how large and damaging they are. So this community is probably remember the Cedar Fire from 2003 and the Witch Fire from 2007. Is everybody kind of familiar with that? That is, this fire right here and this fire right here. So it doesn't even take an eighth of this pie chart. And I think for those of you that were around here at that time, you know how damaging and devastating that was for the region. So with that, we're trying to be more proactive. So looking at structure lost. So when it comes to structures destroyed, this is the same type of graph, but looking at that. So the very large one here is that Paradise Fire that you might have heard of. That was the Camp Fire. That was over 18,800 structures destroyed in one single fire, right? Completely devastated the town. Again, we look at the Cedar Fire. That was 2,800. And the Witch Fire, 1,650 structures destroyed from that fire, okay? So you can see again, of the past 12 years, of the largest, most damaging fires, 3/4 of them have happened in the last 12 years. So that's part of the reason why AB 38 was passed, to try to address these issues and to not have these catastrophic, devastating fires. It is, so these were taken from our Facebook page, and these numbers are current to the last calendar year, and every year they come out with the updated statistics on it. Okay, so this is San Diego County, and this is an overlay of the large damaging wildfires that we've had in the past 20 years. So here's the Cedar Fire, here's the Witch, the Paradise, Pumacha. What this tells us is that here in San Diego County, we have a very long history of large, devastating wildfires, pretty much throughout the entire county. So we definitely have precedents, and it really becomes a matter of when these types of events will happen again in the future. So what is defensible space? Defensible space is the buffer created between a structure and the vegetation that surrounds it. This space is needed to slow or stop the spread of a wildfire, and it helps protect structures from catching fire. It does 4 things. So defensible space protects life inside the structure. So if there's a rapid approaching wildfire, it makes that structure survivable until the residents can safely leave. We also have some people that aren't ambulatory, and they may need assistance to evacuate, and so it gives first responders, law enforcement, and firefighters time to rescue those people and bring them to safety. The other thing it does is when firefighters work in that area after an evacuation order has been sent, it gives firefighters a safe area to work in so that they don't have to lose their lives protecting structures. The other thing it does is it prevents structure fires when somebody's house catches fire from that fire getting into the vegetation and destroying parts of the community or the neighbors. and then it also prevents that same wildland fire from getting into a residence structure. That is the main objectives of defensible space. So there's legal requirements. So Public Resource Code 4291 says you have to have defensible space. And then California Code of Regulations 1299 says this is how you have defensible space. So we have the authority to inspect. What does that authority look like? So as Americans, the Constitution, we have the Fourth Amendment. It says we are right from government, or protection from government intrusion, unlawful search and seizure. So what we do when we do inspect is we go right where an Amazon worker would go, or right where the postal employee would go. We basically walk up to the front door, we turn around, and then we can see what we can see. We don't look into people's houses, we don't go behind people's backyards, and if we come up on a locked gate, we don't go past it. And that's our right to inspect. This is what we're looking for. So what this says is, if you live in the wildland-urban interface, you have to have defensible space at all times, okay? So even if it's raining and everything's green, defensible space is still required. It's a year-round requirement in California. Now that being said, my inspectors were reasonable. What we are looking for is we're looking for voluntary compliance. We work with homeowners and we offer them resources to get in compliance with the law. We're not trying to issue citations and make homeowners' lives difficult. We are trying to protect them and protect the community based on the items that we're covering. So what it says is there's 2 zones. There's a 3rd zone being added that I won't be touching on yet. It's going to come out next calendar year. It's zone 1, which is what we call our lean, clean, and green zone. It's the area immediately surrounding the house. And then we have zone 2, which is our reduced fuel zone, okay? So this is kind of what that would look like. In this case, with the state requirement, it'd be 30 feet around the house, and then the zone itself would go all the way to 100 feet. One of the things that comes up a lot is the property line. Defensible space requirements do not go past the property line. It's not, for the state and the county, and we'll kind of go into different jurisdictions may have different requirements, but for the state and the county, it stops at the property line. The next property owner, again, per the state and the county, a local ordinance could have a different requirement. That property's owner is not required to provide defensible space for their neighbor. However, with written permission, is the way the law is written, the property owner can request to have that defensible space on their neighbor's property. So it's something that neighbors kind of have to work together in order to meet that requirement. But the law requires up to the property line. So this is the example of that. So here, the property line is 60 feet from the structure. That is where the defensible space would stop. And then for the purpose of the law, fuel is anything that's combustible. So if my inspector came up to a house and they saw something like this, this would have to be removed as per the law. It's considered fuel. Even though it's not vegetation, it's flammable and it could impact the house, or that structure fire could get out into the wildland. Okay, so we're gonna go into some different laws, but here's the nice thing. This is all informational, okay? When you eventually request your inspection, you don't have to know all the specifics of the law. You don't need to know how the state is different from the county, is different from the local ordinance. So I'm giving you information that just lets you know that you could be selling a house and the requirements are different, than the house across the street, and this is why that happens, okay? So don't be too concerned about the law differences. The inspector, when they come out, will let you know what the requirements are for that specific structure. But this is great information because we get a lot of those questions. How is it different? They're across the street. This is out. Okay, so San Diego is more restrictive than the state, right? And so if you remember, laws, federal or state laws can be more restrictive but not less restrictive than federal. County, more restrictive but not less, okay? So the county goes, hey, we have a unique problem down here in San Diego that they might not have in other parts of the state. So we're gonna have that first zone, that lean, clean, and green. Instead of 30 feet, we're gonna require 50 feet. So it's 50, 50. So lean, clean, and green, zone 1, 50 feet. They also require, we wanna make sure that fire engines can get to the property. So there's a few requirements to that. One is 10 feet of clearance on each side of the driveway, and then a vertical height clearance of 13.5 feet. So the next time you're driving next to a fire engine, especially our off-road wildland fire engines, you'll find they're about 12 feet tall. So that can delay in the response, and it doesn't just delay in a fire response. Sometimes we have somebody that's having a heart attack, and the firefighters have to carry all their gear because they can't drive the engine because there's an overhanging branch that they can't, and then that patient has a delayed response. They want those paramedics quick, those life-saving drugs quick, and it's delayed because there was a branch in the way and the fire engine couldn't get it. So it is a requirement that it's there. And then finally, private roads and driveways, if it's adjacent, have to have 10 feet as well, clearance around the road. A lot of fires start near roads. It's just generally how it starts. So it could be somebody flicking out a cigarette. It could be poor maintenance to a vehicle, like a catalytic converter that's blowing out, 2,000 degrees pieces of metal. And so if we clear that roadway, if something hot goes there, the idea is that it's not going to get into the vegetation as easy. So this is an example of what the inspection looks like. We're not going to go into huge detail on what the inspection is. It takes me about 2 weeks to train an inspector, but we're looking for specific things. So for example, we would look for 10 feet clearance around the propane tank. We would make sure that the address signs are 4 inches or larger, that there were no dead trees or dead branches on the property. These inspections are available on our website, so there's nothing hidden. And if we find violations, again, we're trying to get that voluntary compliance. We say, hey, you're in violation. This is how you get in compliance with the law. We'll come back in 30 days and see how you're doing. And that's how we do that. And then there's also some financial assistance for low income, and there's some grants that help people get compliance if they can't afford to do so. Okay, so because the county, our first zone is 50 feet for this area. But then there's also local ordinances, and every fire protective district within the county has their own ordinance that is more restrictive than the county. But fear not, when you request the inspection, you do it the same way, no matter the jurisdiction. But these are 4 examples: Escondido Fire Department, North County Fire, Rancho Santa Fe, San Miguel. They all have local ordinances that are more restrictive than the county. I don't enforce those local ordinances, so I can't speak to them specifically, but I do know that they exist. Okay, so this is a map overlay that basically is everybody's zone. So this is Escondido down here, San Marcos, Valley Center, and then this highlighted area here, that would be my jurisdiction. I'm responsible for 102,000 residences within San Diego County. But if it's not in that area, then it's going to be the responsibility of that agency if they have another local ordinance. So it's just saying that we have different geographical boundaries, and that's why you're getting different requirements for different homes in different areas. All right, so now we're getting into the meat and potatoes. How does this all tie in to Assembly Bill 38? Okay, so what this law requires, the law went into effect roughly about a year ago. It says, the seller of real property in a high or very high fire hazard severity zone must have documentation of a compliant defensible space inspection from the appropriate agency. So how do you do that? Well, first, what's a fire severity zone? So this is us right here in this area. We have 4 colors, and it does get a little confusing, so I'll walk you through it. So this dark red is a local government very high zone. That's what the very dark red is. This lighter red is a state very high zone. The orange is a high, and the yellow is a medium, okay? So essentially, this is the better way to think about it. If it's yellow, you're good to go, and if there's not a color, you're good to go. Anything else, it would require an inspection. So this is how you get this information. This is the website that has everything you need to know. It's fire.ca.gov/D space. But if you forget it, no big deal. You just got to remember CAL FIRE and inspection, and it will pop up usually the first result. And once you get to that website, it will look like this. So inside this, it tells you a ton of information. But for you, probably the most relevant is going to be on this left-hand side here. And there's going to be 2 things there. The first thing is that map that I showed you. It's going to say, is this house in the zone? So you're going to click that button. Every time that this website takes you somewhere else, it's letting you know that you're going to another website. So you just hit continue. And then in this case, this is that first link right there. Am I located in a high or very high fire severity zone? You click on the binoculars to search, and then you enter the address to be searched. And then now you have the colors. You can see in this case, we're inside the city of Escondido. This is our current location right now. And there are no colors around here. We would not need an inspection. And then finally, you would schedule the inspection. Now let's say this confuses you. It can. Request the inspection, and if you're not there, you'll get an email saying you don't need an inspection. So we prefer, so that we don't get bogged down on a bunch of emails that don't have it, if you can figure out, to look this up and not request an inspection for a property that doesn't need an inspection, that helps us. But if you're like, I just cannot figure it out, request the inspection, and we will let you know if an inspection is required, okay? So you'll hit the second button. To schedule an inspection, please use this form. It will take you to this. It will give you additional information. Some counties, specifically related to us, Orange County, if you sell property in Orange County, they haven't adopted the state system. They have their own system. Works very similar, and the link is right there when you go to continue. So Santa Barbara, Ventura, Los Angeles, if you sell property there or you have friends that do, they're going to be going to a different website. And it tells you this each time. So what you're going to do is you're going to put the property owner's name. This is the phone number that we're going to call to make the appointment. And this is the email correspondence that we're going to use for that. It will ask you, and it's kind of a trick question in the sense that you have to say yes. Because if you say no, you can't continue. It will say, will a person be present for the inspection? So if you kind of remember, right, that government search of private property, we have to have somebody there to give us permission to see 360 of the property, right? So it has to be a owner of the property or their duly agent to represent them in order for us to have permission to do the full inspection on the property. And that's why that is requirement. It will ask who will be present for the inspection. For real estate agents, it doesn't really matter who's going to be present there. If you want to be included on the email correspondence, always put agent. Because once you put agent, it will ask you your agent information, including your phone number and realtor information. And now you will be on the same correspondence as the property owner. So when we complete the inspection and it's good to go, the owner will get a copy, the agent will get a copy, and then you have a copy of a completed inspection. It will ask you your address. Again, I used this address for today. And perfect example, like this location, it was a little bit hard for me to find, but you might be more familiar with it than me. So we have this little arrow that you can actually drag around and place it on the correct location of the property to be sold. That way, when the inspector goes there, we're speaking on the exact location. Some of the places aren't greatly marked, and it could be confusing, and you don't want your inspector to go to the neighbor's house while you're waiting there for the inspector. So this is the way that you can confirm, yep, this is the house that we're trying to get the inspection on. Finally, you will sign it. Again, this gives us the permission to go onto the property and when we meet with that person, and that's what that signature is allowing us to do. Okay, so we get this question a lot. Can the buyer of the property request the inspection? And the answer is no, because they don't have the authority to allow us onto that property. So it has to be the seller of the property or somebody that's representing the owner of that property. So we're going to be talking about the brand new fire hazard and defensible space disclosure and amendment. This form is not my form, but it has some relevant information that I'm going to speak to. But I'm not the authority on this form, and so if I say something incorrect, refer to California Association of Realtors. So this is the form. Again, this just came out in June of 22. And it gives some requirements in order to meet the AB 38 requirements. And I've highlighted some relevant portions here. So these are the relevant portions. It's only required for residential properties. Defensible space is required for all properties. But as far as AB 38 is concerned, residential properties. Additionally, for the residential properties, we're looking at 1 to 4 units. So if it's a complex with 5 or more units, this law does not apply to it, okay? The law still applies, but you don't have to use this form and do the AB 38 inspection for it, okay? And then lastly, the property has to be in the high or very high severity zone. So if it's in a medium or it's not in any classified zone, an inspection is not required. And then on there is the website, right? And all the information you need, that's what we just walked through, is there. So here it is on the form. That will take you, that is the gatekeeping website where you request the inspection. So it's on the form. There's 2 areas inside the form. The first one is the defensible space disclosure amendment. What this says is to the buyer and the seller, right? An inspection was done or it wasn't, and it was compliant or it wasn't. That's what this section says. And there's actually some great instructions that go with this document that walk you through all the different types of scenarios that you can run through. So I would refer to that, but that is what this section of the document says. So the law allows, if compliance inspection cannot be achieved by the time of close of escrow, the buyer and seller can enter an agreement where the buyer will get compliance within 1 year. So what this does is this. It basically transfers the responsibility from the seller to the buyer for the real estate transaction, okay? However, if you remember, the law is at all times. So day one, the buyer is already in violation of the law if it's not met. But for the purposes of the transaction, they have 1 year to get in compliance, okay? And what this is intended for is, let's say you request an inspection, but I can't get an inspector to you in time. That's the intention of this basically transfer of responsibility, to not hold up the transaction. The inspections are good for 6 months. 6 months. So there is no, for the county and for the state, there is no cost to request an inspection. Some local agencies, to basically pay for the inspections and the workload that comes with that, do charge. Most of the time, the charge is about $150 for an inspection. You can request the inspection, and if it doesn't sell, so let's say you're talking to a potential seller, and they say, well, I think I want to sell, but I'm not 100% sure, but maybe. Request the inspection. It's good for 6 months. There's no penalty. For many people, there's no charge, okay? If they decide, you know what, I love the house, I'm not going to be selling it, no harm, no foul. So it's better right when you're having those conversations with potential clients to just get the inspection going as quick as possible. That way you run in the scenario where you're still waiting for that inspection. Currently, I have 15 inspectors. I have 3 that primarily do AB 38. We do our inspections within 10 business days. So we do them very quickly. I will say, we do get a lot of requests that say, I'm closing tomorrow, can you get out here today? That makes it a little bit difficult. And I do wonder how long the house was listed. So I do understand that this is a newer law, but the law's been in effect for about a year. So that's something that you should just put the request in, and especially if it's for us, there's no charge. So there's no harm, no foul. At the very least, we made contact. We did some public education. If there was violations, we see that as a win, so that homeowner, will be ready for the next big wildfire. Okay? Perfect. All right, and then we will go into a quick video for home hardening.
Wildfire can destroy your home and property. Harden your home with fire ignition resistant materials before wildfire strikes. Fire ignition resistant materials can help protect your home and can reduce the spread of wildfire. Upgrades to your roof, vents, windows, deck, fence, and more can harden your home, giving it the best chance of surviving a wildfire. Don't wait until it's too late. Prepare for wildfire and harden your home now. Learn more from CAL FIRE at readyforwildfire.org.
Okay, so remember I started that presentation with those graphs and that campfire specifically with the 18,500 structures destroyed, right? So what we found is the building code changed in 2008. There's something called Chapter 7A, and basically what it does is it makes buildings, residential buildings, more resilient to wildfires, okay? 51% of structures, there was 350 that were compliant to that Chapter 7A. Half of them were unaffected by the fire in that area. So the home hardening worked. Only 18% of the 12,000 that were not survived. So it was a 33% increase in survivability based on that hardening of the structure. And that video kind of said, fire-resistant siding, fire-resistant fences, decks, roof that's not combustible. Those are some examples. Double pane windows compared to single pane. There's a whole, really, art into hardening a home, and we won't go into the huge details on that, but it can make a big difference. And that's what that C.A.R. form is saying. It's a notification to the buyer that, just so you know, this home is not hardened and it makes you at higher risk. So if you retrofit it, which of course is going to cost money, it will make your home more resilient for a wildfire. That is what that disclosure is telling you. And so here it is right here. That's that disclosure, and it's saying fire hardened vulnerabilities. So you're aware that the roof construction is untreated, there's combustible landscaping, there's single pane, non-tempered glass. These are notifications to the buyer of higher risk, but it's not a requirement that they have to get retrofitted. All right. So again, it's an art, home hardening. It's about a 2-hour presentation, which I don't have time for today. And so readyforwildfire.org is where you'll find all the information required for home hardening. And then this pretty much gets to the end of my section of the presentation. I'm going to hand it off to the rest of the panel here. However, I'm going to stick around for questions, and we're going to answer questions as a group. And then I also brought 3 of my inspectors. We will stay here for as long as necessary. We really appreciate this outstanding opportunity. So if you have questions that weren't answered in this presentation, come on up afterwards, and we'll make sure to answer everything we can. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, and again, I know you've got lots of questions, and especially about the C.A.R. form, but we do have the attorney here who will answer some of those. So make sure you write those down. I know that they're important, and we will get to every question after the next presentation. So fire hardening defensible space is certainly a component of this, but you have questions about insurance as well, which is a big deal. I mean, for those of you who've been doing this as long as I have, it used to be that the day before escrow closed, you'd say, oh my gosh, I got to get a binder on the house, right? You'd call, and in 5 minutes, the house is insured. And that's not the case anymore, as you know. It's a big deal about insurance. So we do have Paul Cassidy here from Farmers Insurance, who's going to talk about the insurability of homes and best practices for that. So Paul?
Somebody asked me if I was doing this presentation today, and was that you? And I go, yeah, it was. Let's go. Here we go. So we're going to touch on a few different fire insurance issues that some of which have already kind of been touched on a little bit, but we'll go through and address them. And if there's things that you're concerned about, we can bring that up at the end. Recent fire history, the Oak Fire hopefully is mostly out now. I know they've got people up in Yosemite still cleaning that up. We talked about the Complex Fire. A little bit louder? There we go. So there's a little bit of fire history, and the one of the interesting things I heard about the Paradise Fire is, I can't speak for all insurance companies, but I heard that Farmers had 4 million? I want to say 4 million in losses. 400 million in losses. No one insurance company can sustain that kind of loss, and I'll touch later on how the reinsurance companies come in and affect that. It's not just physical issues affecting the industry, it is economic issues, and those issues go nationally beyond California as well. There is a California Insurance Guarantee Association. Part of your insurance premiums go into a tax that help deal with companies that do go insolvent, but there's a cap on the amount of coverage you have, and most homes these days, especially with the increased cost of reconstruction, aren't going to be in that cap. So having that there is great. If a company does go out of business, there's something, but it's not something that we want to necessarily rely on. a lot of homes were grandfathered for a long time. That if you're with the company and you've been there with them for 20 years, they'd let you keep renewing. The reinsurance companies, especially as underwriting got dialed down from the zip code level to the individual address level, the reinsurance companies were saying, we can't keep renewing this home. It's gonna burn. We're going to lose it. The risk is too high now. We have the numbers, we have the data. This one is going to get non-renewed. And so sometimes the reason for non-renewal, it hasn't come from your agent, it's not coming necessarily even from your company. It's coming from management level, executive level business decisions that go way up the chain of command into layers of insurance that I'm vaguely aware of. But it's a much broader issue when you're getting that non-renewal. It probably isn't you, and it was probably a benefit that you had had that policy for as many years as you did if you were getting non-renewed for fire reasons, as some of these reinsurance decisions are coming through and causing that non-renewal wave to come through this year. Retail insurance. The unfortunate reality also is that politics come into play, because the Department of Insurance is now an elected position and not an appointed position. It's probably the second most powerful position in the state of California. So who's sitting there is probably looking at their next job, and they don't want to upset the public. So right now, insurance companies are not getting the insurance rate adjustments that they're needing to be profitable. And when that happens, if you can't take rate, you stop writing policies, or you tighten your underwriting. You only take the best of what you can, which makes other people who are in more challenging homes more difficult to write one way or another. So that is also a contributing factor that comes into kind of the grand scheme of what we're dealing with in this room, trying to get deals done. So hardening, we touched on that already. We don't want to see wood shake roofs. I haven't seen one in a while, and I got one this week, and I was like, there's still some out there. But yeah, wood shake roof, that needs to get replaced by the seller because the buyer can't do it. I used to be able to find companies that would do roof exclusions. I completely missed on this one. Nobody would even talk to me about it, to do a roof exclusion, and so the buyer could get in there to rebuild the roof, do the renovations, and rewrite the policy with somebody that was more of a standard market. So that's becoming more challenging as underwriting is tightening up. Older homes, you probably can't reconstruct the eaves, but you can seal up those vents. You can get in there and do renovations that make the home safer for fire protection. We went over trees and brushes around the house. They're doing drones now to look at property. So they're looking down, they see the tree over that roof line. It may not be touching the roof anymore, but that's not what the underwriter's gonna see. So trees need to be cut back from the roof. I had a very interesting one. Asked the guy, any trees touching the roof? No. But the palm tree, it was a 2-story, and the palm tree was coming up out of the planter under the eaves, into the eaves. It wasn't touching the roof, fair enough. But if that caught on fire, it was gonna burn straight up under the roof. That home was gonna be done. So yeah, increasing in hardscape, non-flammable plants is always something that they're going to be looking for. The chaparral beyond the property limits is not going to be something that the seller is going to control, but sometimes the homeowner association is involved in, or the Department of Land Management. So as underwriters are looking at a home, I might be looking at a home in Vista that backs up to unabated chaparral all the way out to Valley Center. Well, that home is a fire risk for a fire that starts in Valley Center. What was the name of the fire that came through all the canyons? Was it 17?
There's so many.
Yeah, it was. So yeah, homes. Fire starting out in the mountains, come to the coast. They've come through the valleys, and so if you're backing up to those canyons, that's going to be something the underwriters are going to be concerned about. There are a couple pilot programs with companies, vendors that are flame retardant. They come out and spray your property with all this flame retardant foam that breaks down over time and goes away after the fire's passed. Those aren't widespread yet. It's obviously a cost. You can't get to everybody if there's a wildfire, so those have been kind of hit and miss in terms of their effectiveness, but there's other things they're trying to make work. And just everybody should have an evacuation plan. If there's a fire, don't wait for it to be mandatory. When I had the Lily fire coming from Bonsall coming towards my house, if I had waited until it was mandatory evacuation, the roads were so jammed, my wife wasn't actually able to get home to pick up stuff. She had to meet us somewhere else. So pick a rendezvous point. Get out beforehand. Save all your photos onto a hard drive. You don't have to pack everything. You know, there's lots of ways, and have a go bag. If you put a go bag together, put some water in it, because at that point, when you have all that adrenaline going, you're going to be dehydrated, and dehydrated people make bad decisions. So I already did that one. Go the other way. So talking about underwriting changes, as the losses have been increasing, we've been talking about the last many years, the many devastating wildfires. The insurance companies are still financially recovering from those. They're not profitable. If you can't take rate to cover those losses, you're going to start tightening up underwriting guidelines. You're not going to want older homes. You're not going to want homes that are going to be exposed. You're not going to want homes where you have 40 other people in the neighborhood insured with your company because your market share is too high. So all of those things get into the factor of how they underwrite. You can even have companies get to the point where they're like, we've had enough, we're leaving the market. Many, many years ago, Allstate stopped writing homeowner policies. Their agents write with a secondary market now with a different company. It's not Allstate Insurance. I can't remember the name of the company, but that's one example. Other companies just pack up and leave entirely. And if you have too many companies do that, if it gets to the point where it's intolerable economically, you're not going to have a diversity of risk. No one insurance company wants all the business. They can't afford it. There's no way they would ever collect enough premium, and their reinsurance deals would never work that way. When there isn't anything else, we do have somebody here who's going to be able to talk about the FAIR plan. That is becoming a solution, and it's probably becoming a solution a little too often. We need to find a way back to the regular markets being able to insure the homes, and if we knew what the answer to that was, they wouldn't have me here. Let's see here. What are we doing here? So the reconstruction cost of a home is not its market value. We don't care what the home's worth. We care what it's going to cost to rebuild the home, remove the debris, and reconstruct the home to the condition it was before the loss. That has changed a lot. Let's see, where's the rest? Oh, okay. Traditionally, the cost per square foot, more pre-COVID, for average grade construction was going to be that $180, $200 a square foot. That's easily well over $250 a foot now. I am consistently finding people underinsured. Decades ago, there used to be an endorsement on a homeowner policy that called guaranteed replacement cost. So whatever they insured you for, they would still rebuild the home no matter what it cost. That doesn't exist anymore. We do have an extended replacement cost endorsement in there to give you some margin of error, but it's not something you want to rely on. It's what you want to use. The amount of coverage you want is going to be the amount that if your home burned down. Now, if your whole neighborhood burns down and a few others, the availability of contractors and material and economics of supply and demand may make it much more expensive to rebuild your home and take longer. So the cost to rebuild then is going to be higher. So that's when your extended replacement cost will typically kick in. But it's important to have somebody evaluate the amount that it's going to cost to rebuild. And if it's a nicer home, it's going to be much more per square foot, 300, 400 square foot. I have some custom condos down by the beach that are like $350 a square foot because of the features and the marble and all the upgrades they have in the home. This is my first experience with PowerPoint. Let's see. So the cost of labor is also going up. We have fewer people entering the industry of construction, which means there are fewer contractors, there are fewer people learning the trade, so there's going to be fewer people in the future. So the cost and what they can ask for rebuilding your home is also going to be going up. So we try to moderate what we can with the rate, because as you increase the amount of coverage, you're going to be increasing the premium with it. So there are ways of using discounts to try to bring that cost under control. I've had examples where for some of the higher value homes, then once the discounts were put in, the cost of all the other policies that we used to bundle and get those discounts were covered by the discount on the homeowner policy. It was 4 figures in discounts. So wrapping the policies up into one carrier, if you can, is certainly to the advantage most of the time. So when do you want to talk about insurance? We mentioned it before, that it used to be the parsley on the plate, the phone call at the 11th hour. I think my office record for turning in evidence of insurance around was 6 minutes. Those days are gone. It should be the first call. In fact, it should be before the first call, because if you're going to be making an offer on a home or listing a property, you might want to know if it's even eligible. What challenges are you going to face? Are you going to be needing to go to a secondary market, have it brokered out, or end up in the FAIR plan with a difference in condition policy to bring back the missing coverages? As I said before, it's down to the address level. Your neighbor might be eligible and you might not be. It's that specific. They're looking at fire load around your house, the slope of the property. Many factors go into what they determine it. But what we're not doing is looking at those maps that you just saw a minute ago. Every insurance company has its own method of determining its fire risk. Farmers uses a vendor called Fireline. Other companies have their own ways of doing it. There's other vendors out there who do that evaluation, or they may do it internally themselves, but at the end of the day, each carrier is different. The same way each carrier's policy is different. No two homeowner policies are written exactly the same. So you really do need to talk about the insurance almost before you talk about whether you want to buy the house or not, or list the house. What kind of challenges are you going to see in the eligibility of, because the insurance policy the seller has isn't transferable to the buyer. About half of the rating that goes into an insurance premium is the person, not the property. So, does that person qualify for these discounts? Does that person have claims in their past 5 years on another property? There's a lot of things that can affect the eligibility that have nothing to do with the house. Could be perfect, and that buyer couldn't get the policy. companies withdrawing from the market. 800 number of companies aren't going to really have the experience or expertise or advice. The people answering the phone, the Geico's and Moministas and such, they're there to take orders, they're there to do quotes. They're not going to have the perspective of this. You want to work with an insurance resource who can get you the kind of answers your clients are going to need on each case and each deal. The advantage with Farmers I have, Farmers is a great company, great product, but as over time we've talked about, the underwriting is getting more restrictive. When it's not qualified for Farmers, they have the right of first refusal, you want to work with somebody who can broker out to other companies. I have internal wholesalers, external wholesalers, and ultimately I'm also appointed with the FAIR plan as a broker. So ultimately, I can get any deal through escrow. It's just a matter of at what price. All of this has been a conversation about underwriting and just getting a policy. This year I had several clients renew in Vista that are now at 5-figure premiums. So that's another conversation that's going to affect your ratios with your lenders. So again, what happens in the insurance conversation is going to trickle to the other parts of the deal depending on how that goes. So if you have any questions, of course, we'll be here afterwards. And thank you very much.
There's so much to the insurance that we didn't understand. I want to make sure that before our next speaker comes up, it's important in an event like this to make sure you have some takeaways, right? Some things that you actually, just some bullet points. And I should have mentioned it after Alex's presentation, but my takeaway from that was there are local ordinances in place throughout the county today, right? Every house in the county is under a local ordinance. So it has to be in compliance at all times, right? From Paul's presentation, make sure you call, if you're the listing agent, before the property goes on the market. Talk to your insurance, find out what the restrictions or challenges are going to be before you put the property on the market. And if you're working with a buyer, same thing. Every property has its own rating, not just a blanket zip code, but each property has its own rating. So while the house across the street or next door might be insurable, yours might not be, okay? All right, so one of the big mysteries here, and if you've sold property out in the areas like Fallbrook where I am, if you haven't had to deal with FAIR plan yet, you will. Sold a couple properties that were not insurable without the FAIR plan. So we have Phil Irwin here from the FAIR plan. He's going to explain the mysteries of California FAIR plan.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here today. Just to introduce myself a little bit more, so my role with the California FAIR Plan is I'm a public relations representative, and so all throughout the state I attend meetings with communities, town hall meetings. I've spent a lot of time in Paradise for the Rebuild Paradise project, as well as fire safe councils, Firewise councils, fire alliance groups. So I'm pretty well versed of what's going on in the community, and basically the areas we're talking about, the wildland-urban interface, makes up about a third of California. So if you think about it, probably 5 years ago, you know, the catalyst of this big change for insurance really was the Camp Fire. That's really where companies took a hard look and really started taking drastic actions, and that's where you really started seeing some of the non-renewals and the drastic changes to underwriting guidelines. But 5 years ago, real estate agents were in these markets were indifferent to insurance, and in 2/3 of the state, most real estate agents are indifferent to insurance. It's not a big focus on their transaction. So in my role, I'm a public relations representative for the California FAIR Plan, but I also run an in-house insurance agency brokerage for a large real estate organization in Northern California. So again, I spend every day helping agents stay focused on their transactions to make sure there's nothing on the insurance side that's going to impede a deal. So we want to make sure that we look at every alternative. We really are educated about the process. And so you sitting here today are learning about the process, because when you're talking to buyers or sellers, you want to be able to tell them with confidence how this is going to look, what this looks like today. If they end up with a policy that's much more expensive than it would have been a few years ago, what's it going to look like 2 years from now? What can I do to this home to make it less expensive or more appealing to an insurance company down the road where I'll have a better price? Those types of questions. Home hardening, some of those measures, there's in the wildland urban interface, there's companies marketing to homeowners to make improvements to your home. And some of it, the home hardening measures, some of it, makes sense, but some of it all of it is expensive. So you want to do what's going to make sense. So people ask us every day, if we do these things to this home, if we take these steps, we, put this water tank, is it going to make a difference? If we get our own, fire hydrant, is it going to make a difference? And a lot of this stuff is expensive. And, I always tell people, today, do what's going to be safe. It's going to make you sleep better at night. What's going to make you feel more safe in your home? Right now, the reality is a lot of the insurance companies aren't looking at those features individually in these markets. They're either, when we're talking about the wildland urban interface, you just draw a line on a third of California. These companies are looking at these markets and saying no to them. They're not looking at the individual risks as much. They're looking at the area, the zip codes, and really carving it out and saying no. So I live in El Dorado County, which is where the Caldor fire was a year ago this week, and which is also the home of South Lake Tahoe, that side of Lake Tahoe. And another big factor we see in that market is a split between Nevada and California. So in California, you have the California Fair Plan. In Nevada, you don't have a fair plan. So you really see the impact for the homes that are in the same neighborhoods, just different side of the street is a different state. Your options are different. So let me just run through a little bit and go through to teach you a little bit more about the fair plan. So you can, if you have questions, you can have a better understanding. Because the truth is, a lot of people don't understand it. It's a great organization that was created. In 1968, the fair plan was established. It was right after, it was a time of some major wildfires as well as the Watts riots. There was civil unrest in Los Angeles. And there was areas where the larger insurance companies were saying, hey, we're not comfortable writing in these markets, so they developed the California Fair Plan. It's a private association comprised of all insurers licensed to write business in the state, so every insurance company that does business in the state, and it's overseen by a governing board that also includes the California Insurance Commissioner and insurance company executives. So how the fair plan works is basically we're required to write insurance on every home in the state unless there's illegal activity on the premises or there's major unrepaired damages that are going to take more than a year to repair. And again, even in that situation, there's different ways to structure your policy to get coverage. So really, the truth is to take away the myth of somebody that's shopping for a home in California, they're afraid that they can't get insurance. The fair plan is always there to fall back on. And the other thing about the fair plan too is if you get into areas, so when we do have an active fire, a lot of times the insurance companies will block out zip codes, or sometimes they'll block out the whole state and say we're not going to write for the next 30 days in these states. And you may have a deal in escrow and you're wondering, oh my gosh, we just had a quote from that company and it's all set to go, and now what do we do? So the fair plan does not have any moratoriums. So even in cases like when you've got closings scheduled, you could use the fair plan temporarily, and then once the moratorium is lifted, you can go back. So again, it's another benefit to just understanding how that works. If you've been in an active fire situation, you see how that happens with the carriers. So it's just something unique to the fair plan. The fair plan does not ever have a moratorium. They never stop writing insurance. So one of the things that's obvious, and this was mentioned before, the fair plan, if you think about concentration, so a company wants to balance out their risks, and the fair plan doesn't have that luxury. So basically 100% of what the fair plan writes is in risky areas. So their concentration is extreme. So in the high brush areas, so if you think of all those maps that you just saw where the red maps and the maps that showed everything that was most severe, all the other insurance companies can look at those areas and say, we're not going to write in those areas. We're going to pick and choose where we want to write. But the fair plan doesn't have that luxury. So 100% of what the fair plan writes is in what's called high concentration areas. And that's really, in San Bernardino is actually one of our highest. We have the most concentration in San Bernardino specifically, but they're all getting there. I mean, it's been 5 steady years of growth. And the truth is, our goal is to not be needed. The FAIR Plan's goal is to not be needed anymore, is to see the markets restored where the carriers are willing to come back. So getting covered by the FAIR Plan. So it's very easy for insurance agents to become brokers of the FAIR Plan. So you can go to their website, or you can go to the Department of Insurance website, or you could just talk to your local agent. More than likely, they're going to be appointed with the FAIR Plan and have access to that. The key is, when it comes to working with getting to the point of the FAIR Plan, it's referred to as the insurer of last resort. So there's what's called a diligent search. So it's more of an ethical. It's a requirement, but it's also there's ethical boundaries. So I mean, really, to me, as an insurance agent or broker, I don't want anybody buying an insurance policy, a FAIR Plan policy from me, or any insurance policy from me, if there's a better or if it's a less expensive alternative available that's going to give them the right coverages. So you want to turn over every stone. You want to make sure before you decide on going with if you're at a point where the FAIR Plan is an alternative that you have to consider, I highly encourage you to shop extensively. Get ahead of it. Look at different brokers, because if you think about it, every insurance office has different product availability. Doesn't mean they're going to always have the right answer for you, but it's good to explore every alternative and some different schools of thought, as long as there's, that the right coverages exist. So there are certain agents, certain offices that do not have access beyond one product line, and they pivot straight to the FAIR Plan, because in that office, the diligent search said no, and now I'm going to the FAIR Plan. That's the only thing they have available, where you want to look broadly to see if there is an alternative that's available. The FAIR Plan, there's no penalty, so if something better becomes available, then you can switch off the FAIR Plan with no penalty, get a refund of your premium. One other thing with closing is just to set expectations. We highly recommend, if you've got a listing or if you've got somebody going out house hunting, get quotes in advance, so specifically you're not trying to ballpark what the insurance might be. You're going to set the expectations up front, and that way they understand that. And another thing with FAIR Plan, there's a 40% down payment that's required, so that's a little different. If you're paying through an impound account, you want to set that expectation up well before the closing, in the early discussions, if the broker hasn't done that already, because that's another problem, is they'll put in the money, they'll transfer their money for their closing costs to the lender, and the lender didn't realize the FAIR Plan needs a down payment before the closing to make the policy active, and then the buyer ends up having to come out of pocket an additional 40% of the premium. They'll get refunded probably 60 days later. But again, that's a pitfall that you see happen. And the truth is, when you use the FAIR Plan, it's just a different process. The FAIR Plan covers specifically fire, smoke, explosion, lightning, windstorms. Then the difference in conditions policy, the primary elements there are the water coverage and the liability coverage. So with the FAIR Plan you're using the difference in conditions policy and the FAIR Plan, you're using 2 policies to write where normally you would just write 1. And same thing with closing. Lenders especially if you're dealing with lenders that are out of state or aren't local or don't understand the circumstances, they're paying 2 policies. And that's another thing that you want to make sure that you're setting the expectations when you're in this space, that this is how it works, and you want to have those conversations in advance so things stay seamless. The other thing is the difference in conditions policies. There's lots of them available, and they're not all the same. So again, same thing. You want to make sure. That's another reason why we encourage all of our customers to shop broadly, because you want to look at multiple alternatives before you just make one decision. Another thing, and leave the insurance. I would say leave the insurance changes and dialogue to the professionals, because especially because we're usually talking about higher premium scenarios, and when debt to income becomes an issue, you start seeing some really strange recommendations coming out of mouths that shouldn't be making coverage recommendations, you know, and there are some things you can do in some cases if things are packaged and maybe there's something that, an element of the policy that isn't as critical in this situation or doesn't apply to this house, they can make some compromises. Or somebody wants, if the buyer says, I'll compromise some personal property coverage, you know, to lower the premium a little bit, or I'll go with a higher deductible, you know, leave that dialogue or those decisions to the buyer and the insurance agent, insurance professional. So that's the California FAIR Plan in a nutshell. And again, it's a unique insurance organization. You know, I'm very proud to represent the FAIR Plan because it's so mysterious. We're not out trying to grow. The FAIR Plan's goal is to not be needed. So there's no marketing materials. We don't have marketing reps. Our goal is not to grow. And the people that we help are people that are in areas that are very fire prone. And that's the reality of the California we live in today. And, you know, I've been in many fire areas, many of the impacted areas, and it's like something. I mean, we've been seeing it year after year, but it's really a season now. It's really an ongoing thing. You know, even just evacuating. You know, we had customers evacuated for 3 weeks, 4 weeks sometimes. You know, and it's like you think about just an evacuation is quick. You'll be gone overnight and be back in your place by tomorrow. And it doesn't even work that way, you know. I've seen people living in the Walmart parking lot in our tent. You know, our local Walmart became full of tents. You know, it's just really, it's wild. You know, it really is. And I grew up in the Malibu area, and now I live in Northern California. And you see the fires. It's definitely something we have to be prepared for. But again, on your side, the more you know, the more better resources you have for your buyers or your sellers. The more work you do up front, you know, the better you're going to be able to help them. And again, just to kind of echo what you've heard a couple times, you know, the defensible space is important, but you're going to see so much conflicting information. You know, the NHD report says it's a fire zone, or it doesn't say it's a fire zone, but the insurance company says it is. So ultimately, there's lots of different schools of thought coming into play, lots of different rule books coming into play, and you've got to kind of be in the middle and kind of explain to your buyers that, hey, the insurance company, it's really their decision and their rules as to why they'll write in certain areas or why they won't, and then all the other rules just to kind of explain that process. Another big thing that comes up too is if the seller has a normal HO3 policy, a normal homeowners policy, and the new buyer can't get it. And that's another way that the insurance companies are, they stop the non-renewals for the most part right now, but what they're doing is they're just, by attrition, they're getting off of certain risks. So if somebody moves out of the area, they're just not going to non-renew it. They're not going to write a new policy. They're just going to let it fall away. So it's another way the insurance companies can get off of risks in certain areas or lessen their concentration. So it's another thing that's happening. So again, you know, areas that really aren't even a fire risk, aren't even in the WUI, companies are saying no to, and it's tough. The long-term answer is to get the insurance companies to come back. That's what this has to be. The long-term answer is not the FAIR Plan. FAIR Plan is a stopgap. We're a temporary solution, and it's expensive because what we write is risky. The answer is to get all the insurance companies to come back and write into these markets individually, look at these risks, look at defensible space, look at home hardening, look at these measures, and start making those types of underwriting decisions versus just saying no to the zip code. You know. So anyhow, we could talk about this all day. I'm looking forward to the panel discussion, and we'll be here afterwards for Q&A as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Okay, we have one left, the attorney. So he's going to answer some questions on the C.A.R. form.
Here, give it to me.
I can't see
me. I got it.
Wow.
They're coming for us.
That was bad. I think the thing that I took out of that just really opened my eyes, I mean, obviously everybody knows the FAIR Plan is expensive, but why is that? And it's because the private insurers can pick and choose the policies they want to write, and the FAIR Plan can't. So they get all the ones that nobody wants to write, and that's why their premiums are so much higher. So that was very enlightening. Thank you. Okay, Fred Pfister, we've got 20 minutes, and then we're going to do Q&As.
Okay, wonderful. Well, last but not least is the attorney. I'm Fred Pfister. Some of you know me, some of you don't. But I am an attorney for White and Bright, which has been in this community for, I'm proud to say, for 41 years. And we're in our second generation of that firm. So here's my shameless plug of who I am. I've been general counsel for this great association since 2016. And as most of you know who know our firm, we represent agents and brokers and have been doing so. That's been our core practice for decades now. And where we represent them, well, in my personal practice, I do transactions and I do litigation. And the litigation side, it's defending agents and brokers from mostly non-disclosure claims. And that's what I want to look at here in terms of the potential types of claims, because it ties into this new disclosure area, right? So you only get more disclosures. In my career, I've only seen your requirements for your job go up. They have not gone down. And this is a whole new area of potential disputes and what I would call pre-closing and post-closing issues. And this is, again, what we do in our practice. And I characterize as these two different areas, and I'm sorry I'm going fast here because I know that your time is valuable, but I characterize in these two areas because the two areas are, okay, I have a problem during my transaction, how do I solve it? And that's really important. That, you know, if you don't close, you don't get paid, your client's unhappy on both sides. And so what is the struggle to get to get over that issue? The second thing is what I would call post-closing issues. And sometimes you can't resolve those because the transactions, you know, the transaction's already closed and you can't change what happened in the transaction. But those are what I would call more of your non-disclosure cases. And the good news, you might be thinking, well, I haven't heard of any fire non-disclosures. I haven't heard of any litigation that comes out of, you know, failing to fill out the correct forms. Well, the bad news, I guess, on that is the law is so new that these cases haven't made it through the court system yet. And you know, my prediction, and don't take this as gospel, but my prediction is you'll see them after there's a major fire. Is after a major fire that happens in San Diego County or some other area where these forms were required and people didn't fill them out correctly, that's when you'll see the litigation. Because these are catastrophic, right? These are, I always used to say that the worst things I see a non-disclosure were water and subsidence, right? Because the house could be destroyed, right? Well, fire is the same thing. Fire, you can now add fire to that same category because you get a wildfire that comes through, everything's gone. You've all seen it, everything's gone, and that's a huge loss. So that's something that I think we'll see. Before we go into a little bit more, though, I should, and Chris should hit me because I'll have to do my standard disclosure here that this is not legal advice. And I encourage you to consult your attorney. Even if I am your attorney, consult me later. This is not intended to be legal advice, and you cannot rely on this. Consult your broker or your attorney. Pay him later. And yes, and pay me later. Yes, but that's important. You know, always when you have questions on something like this, on disclosures, I always encourage. The first thing when I get a call from an agent without their broker, the first thing I ask them is, have you talked to your broker about this? And oftentimes it's, no, I just thought I'd call you first. And I said, well, no, you know, your broker may have this answer first, but yeah, we can help. So as we go into this, the pre-closing issues, I kind of skipped and jumped to post-closing, but the pre-closing issues are what I would call the deal killers and the delays and causing problems during escrow. And you've heard a couple of them, and I don't want to repeat what my colleagues over here have discussed. But one of the things that's really important is not waiting on this issue. This is what I would call if you've seen some of my other presentations, my red flag presentation, this is a red flag, right? You live in Fallbrook, you live in Valley Center. Fire is important. It's a red flag. When you take that listing, you should be addressing these issues. You should be addressing home hardening. You should be addressing insurance. Because if you wait in the transaction, it's gonna be a problem. I can tell you from personal experience. I bought a home in last year in a very high fire risk area, and I thought I addressed insurance early. I was on it within the first week of the escrow, and it still delayed closing. So this is something that should be addressed immediately in your transactions. And I also want to address something that Chris said when he started. He said this is extremely misunderstood in his 40-year career. He's never seen something so misunderstood. The good news is we're getting somewhat away from that. And I completely agree with him. About 2 years ago, when these laws first came out and these forms first came out, there was very little guidance. There wasn't this great website. There were people calling saying, I have no idea what my local ordinance is. Who do I even call for an inspection? And now it's great that there is, as you've seen, a lot of you have been in this, have seen this form change every 6 months. This form is changing, but hopefully we're getting closer and closer to a better form that is a little bit more useful. And I'll talk a little bit about that form here. I know we're limited on time, but I'll talk as much as I can about it. Another takeaway, though, I wanted to address from I like that when you summarized what's a good takeaway. One of the takeaways is the compliance issue. When you said you must always be in compliance, right? That if you're selling a home that's out of compliance, well, what triggered in my mind the immediate thing was, the TDS where it says, are they in compliance? Are you referencing that? There's a TDS section that talks about are you in compliance with all local laws or all laws? It's kind of a general concept. And so are you looking at when you're selling a home outside of compliance, are you going back to that form and saying, well, wait a second, do we have inconsistencies? One of the biggest problems I have as an attorney when I'm defending a client, an agent or a broker who's being sued for a non-disclosure of material facts, is what I would call, the two biggest things are the clean sheet and inconsistent information. The clean sheet is when literally they do nothing. It's just everything's perfect on this house. This is the award-winning, this is the unicorn home, that there's literally no flaws in this home. It's 35 years old and it's in a higher fire zone, but there's nothing wrong with it, right? Yeah, no. That's the clean sheet. The other problem is when there's inconsistent information. When I have one report that says one thing and then the other report says another. So in this case, you have, you're out of compliance with your with the local ordinance, but your TDS says that you're not aware of any. You're not aware of any problems, right? That's inconsistent information. And then maybe you have a report, you have a report from, some other source that says they give you a bid to put it in compliance, right? And so when you have inconsistent information, you have trouble, is what I would call that. That ends up being, were you negligent in doing your duties? And that's where we're trying to get you out of. We're trying to make sure you're not negligent. Because that's what the buyer will say later on. So I just want to address that issue. One last thing on that is you'll notice when you look at the RPA and you look at the purchase agreement, there's no real insurance contingency, right? There's a loan contingency and there's other contingencies, but there's not an insurance contingency. So I've had a number of calls, just anecdotally here, where they've said, we're having a really hard time getting, we've released our loan contingency, but we got the fair plan, or we got the quote, and the quote's way higher, and now we can't qualify anymore. Now it's gonna bankrupt my buyer, and what do we do? Well, that might be too late. But certainly consult your attorney if that ends up being the case. But that's another reason why you address it early in the transaction. So again, without trying to repeat some information here, with the home hardening, there's one issue that I wanted to address because of the requirements. One of the issues we didn't talk about earlier in this presentation was if the property is TDS exempt. this is for the home hardening's for residential 1 to 4 units, and not being exempt from a TDS. So if you are exempt from TDS, you don't have to do it. And if you remember, what is TDS exempt? It's, is it a foreclosure? Is it a court-ordered sale? Is it, you're acting as a fiduciary and you didn't live there for the last 1 year? We can get into those specifically, but it's important to know that TDS exempt. If you are TDS exempt, you don't have to fill out that form. The question I get sometimes, and some of you may know where I'm going with this, when you have that, especially out here in the kind of the more rural areas of the county, is there might be multiple structures on the property, and you say, well, it's more than 4 houses. It's not 1 to 4. There's a barn. There's these outbuildings. Trust me, I've sold a number of those. When in default, I say fill out the form, right? Don't parse, well, this isn't a legal unit, that's not a legal unit. I think you could get into a difficult spot. I'd say when in default, fill out the form. That's normally a good rule of thumb, is when you're looking at disclosures, more disclosure is typically better than less. I've had very few people faulted for over-disclosing. I've had a lot of people faulted for under-disclosing. And so if you're going to take the position, well, there's 3 outbuildings that, 2 aren't occupied, and maybe they're not legal, but that equals 5, I'm counting on my hand, so I don't have to do this, right, Fred? Come on. I think that would be a difficult defense. And also something I wouldn't want you to get into, of whether that structure is legal or not. That's really outside your scope. Of course, the issue also is this in a very high or very high severity zone? We talked about that extensively. Those maps are great. The locators are great. Like I said, the resources that now have been deployed in this are outstanding, because it was extremely confusing about 2 years ago how to do these. So that's very welcome, and I think that's probably your biggest takeaway from today. The issue, of course, is if it was constructed before 2010. So look at that. What I wouldn't do, though, is in terms of the 2010 cutoff, is, again, I wouldn't be parsing that when, oh, wait, we occupied it in January, but I think it was built in 2019. What's the building code look like on this? Don't bother with that. If you, when in doubt, disclose. When in doubt, use the form. I know some brokerages are just saying they don't even care when the time frame was, and they're just saying that to their agents, just disclose, just use the form. Don't try to figure out whether it was 09 or 10. I agree with that. I don't see any reason why you wouldn't do that in this context. The one additional issue here that I wanted to address is that this home hardening form, or the fire hardening and defensible space, we should call it, it's in the family of the TDS, right? It's one of those forms that's required. You can't waive, and it also allows for a cancellation. So if you provide this form late in the transaction, you're risking potential cancellation. It's one of those forms you cannot waive, and it's and that could trigger a return of a deposit and a cancellation. So you risk that, and some of you might be thinking, well, that's impossible in the last 2 years that anyone would cancel when a buyer would cancel when it was such a hot market. But we're flipping into a seller's market here, right? And we're flipping into a market a buyer's market. We're flipping into a buyer's market, and so people may cancel. And so what my advice is, if you're taking a listing, you do this disclosure. First of all, you get the inspection ahead of time. There's no reason why you wouldn't. And you do this disclosure right off the bat. There's no reason to wait on this disclosure into the transaction. However, if you do, the RPA allows you to do it within 7 days. That's 11D of the new RPA. So if you're looking at the RPA, it allows you to do this within 7 days, and then they have their statutory time frame to cancel after their receipt. But why wait? Why not give it to them day one, and let them then have their statutory period to cancel very, very quickly, rather than halfway through the transaction when they're doing all the other inspections and they're getting nervous about the transaction. Do it right away. So that's certainly part of this. Where to find. We have that map and that locator, but it's in your NHD report. I mean, I know that most of you are pulling that right away. You're paying for that right up front. This is clearly labeled in those reports, and so I would rely upon that document and certainly the locator. You can do both, but the natural hazard disclosure report. But again, when in doubt, do it. I want to address something, and I'm sorry I'll jump around a little bit to this form because we already discussed a little bit of it. And I also want to tell you that there are great C.A.R. resources on this. This presentation today, as brief as it is not a substitute for the C.A.R. resources on this disclosure form. They do about an hour presentation. They go through it in detail, and they go through that decision tree that you see. I joke that if you need a decision tree, it's a complicated form, right? If I need separate instructions to fill out a form, I know that it's probably complicated. It's probably worth your time to do that hour training on it, and to, more importantly, go back to your office and have your other agents do it, because you're the agents who are diligent. I always tell the people who come to these meetings are the diligent ones. The other agents in your office who are busy doing something else today, they're the ones who need it more probably. So I go back, and if you're a broker, tell them to do it. But something I wanted to highlight on here is this whole "Are you aware?" section. This fire hardening vulnerabilities. I've got a number of questions of people saying, well, how do I know if the roof coverings are made of untreated wood shingles? I can't even see up there. And they're doing an investigation, right? They're trying to investigate their property. They're being diligent. But remember, this is seller knowledge, right? This is the seller, and this is something that I tell agents, don't fill out the forms for people. Don't fill out what you know about the property. You can talk to them about the forms. You can walk them through the forms. In fact, that's a great idea, and it's a great idea to confirm in writing that you did so. But don't fill out these forms and go on the house and be like, well, let's see, the thickness of this wood looks like, that's why you're getting a report. You're getting a report. If you know these information, if the seller knows this information, include it. But one of the reasons why you're getting a report is so that you don't have to be the expert on, what type of tempered glass is there, because that may not be your expertise. It's not my expertise, and I wouldn't pretend to say, well, this qualifies or this doesn't. So I just wanted to highlight that. But also don't play games with these types of things. Don't play games that you don't know anything about the property. Like I said, that's the clean sheet where it's, I don't see anything, I don't hear anything. They don't have that duty to investigate, but you don't have a duty to mislead either. So just keep that clear. Again, the post-closing issues, these are what I would call post-closing issues, the defensibles, the space, and the disclosure addendum. What's interesting about here is, remember we were talking about earlier, or you heard earlier, that you have to enter into an agreement. If you don't get the property cleared prior to the sale, you're essentially entering into an agreement where the buyer is going to be, or the buyer's entering into an agreement where they're going to be doing it within 1 year. The agreement's actually in here. It's actually in this form. This is a strange form because most forms are a disclosure form. And the reason why they call this an addendum is if you actually see this bottom here is the buyer, this is on 3C, you're actually seeing this is the agreement they're entering into. It's kind of hidden in here, but they're actually entering into an agreement to do this work. Now, I question, what are the legal consequences of violating this agreement, right? Is it some recourse against the seller? I don't think so. I haven't seen that. But this is their way to get around that, that law of, okay, we'll do it after the fact. My prediction is you'll see this as a point of sale thing in the future, where they're not going to say, well, you can do it 1 year after. I think in the future you're going to see, you do it at the point of sale, and that's when it's going to be done. But I don't have a crystal ball either on this, but that's exactly what. It's a strange thing to be buried within a disclosure form that there is some agreement that the buyer is going to be doing this after the close. And like I said, you could go through the decision tree of how this works, but remember, San Diego County has an ordinance. There may be a local ordinance where you're looking. Local ordinances can pop up really at any time. All the local jurisdiction has to do is decide that this is important to them and that they want to do it. And so that's something that, when you go through this tree does it have an ordinance? Yes. If yes, what do you do next? Do you deliver that compliance certificate, or do you tell them that you're not in compliance and that you're going to have to enter into this agreement? I think a number of people, from what I've heard anecdotally, are saying, well, push it onto the buyer, and then the buyer will do it later. Is that the right thing? They're going to be in violation day one. They're going to put their life at risk, their structure at that risk. So that's a danger. If I'm a real estate agent and my buyer is buying something that's out of compliance, gosh, I really want to send them that confirming email. Those of you who know me, I love the confirming email. I really want to send them the confirming email to tell them that this is what the score is, and our advice is to get in compliance, but you can buy your home. So that's something I think that you might want to include with your best practices for those of you who are selling out, what I would call out of compliance homes, or homes of questionable compliance, is making sure that you confirm that is that issue is existing. The same way that they might have a non-conforming use on the property, or they might have a structure without permits, something like that. That's the type of thing that you typically want to confirm, because I'll tell you right now, they will come back, that buyer will come back on you and say, I didn't know that. I didn't know the consequences of that. So something to keep in mind. And like I said, I won't go through all the details of this form, but just kind of in closing, I want to say that these two things, which the two most confusing things that I've seen people bring up are, what's my local ordinance? Luckily today you heard, San Diego County has a more stringent ordinance. If there was a great centralized location to find every single local ordinance, that would be wonderful. Hopefully the legislature provides funding for that and does and puts that together so that there's one location where this is kind of, or maybe C.A.R. will. And the other thing is this point of sale issue and what I call that is certainly my prediction that this will become a point of sale issue, but also that this is the biggest pre-closing issue I see is people not taking care of this and then scrambling at the last couple days. And I know that CAL FIRE is extremely diligent in getting out there, but I just heard 10 business days, and that's a long time in the real estate world, particularly in the last year when there's been, a market, you have 10-day escrows and things like that. If you're not ahead of this issue, you're gonna lose transactions, and they're gonna come back on you, and that's exactly what we don't want. So, like I said, I'm available after this, and certainly please always reach out to me, and I'd love to talk to you about your business. Thank you.
Okay, we've got 10 minutes left of the official meeting, but as they said, these guys are going to stick around afterwards so you get all your questions answered. Yeah, if But I did want to make sure that we recognize again the sponsors, because I know a lot of you will be leaving. So thank you again to Property ID, Loan Depot, Foundation Escrow, Super Home Warranty, and Farmers Insurance to make this thing happen.